The rain was still dripping off Alexander Kane's coat when the heavy oak door swung open. It had been a long day of board meetings, phone calls, and terse negotiations. He had come here, this sprawling countryside estate he had just acquired, not to rest, but to inspect. In his world, trust was a luxury, and even among staff, every detail mattered. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and old cedar. His polished shoes clicked against the marble floor as he walked past the grand staircase. The chandeliers glowed softly overhead, and somewhere deep in the corridors, the muffled hum of a vacuum cleaner echoed. Alexander wasn't looking for anyone in particular. He simply wanted to get a sense of the place, its energy. But when he turned into the East Wing hallway, a part of the estate few guests ever saw, he stopped cold. On the polished wooden floor, against the far wall beneath a curtained window, lay a young woman. Her skin was a rich, deep brown that caught the faint spill of moonlight sneaking through the drapes. Her hair was tied back loosely, a few curls falling onto her cheek. She wasn't alone. A small child, perhaps 2 years old, was curled in her arms, the soft puff of his breath rising and falling against her chest. They were both covered by nothing more than a thin, worn blanket. The floor beneath them was bare, with no rug, no pillow. The marble tiles nearby gleamed like cold water. Alexander's brow furrowed. This estate had at least a dozen spare bedrooms, each with plush mattresses and heated floors, yet here she was, on the floor. The sight jarred him in a way he couldn't immediately explain. He had seen poverty before, but here? In his home? His instinct was to step back, to give her privacy, but something held him there. Perhaps it was the way her arms tightened around the child, even in sleep, as though the world might snatch him away if she loosened her hold. Perhaps it was the faint crease between her brows, the kind that stays even when the body rests, born of years of worry. A floorboard creaked. Beneath his foot, her eyes snapped open. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Her gaze darted from his face to the expensive suit, then to the drops of rain still falling from his sleeve onto the floor. She shifted slightly, shielding the boy's face from view. "I'm sorry, sir," she whispered, her voice hoarse. She began to rise, careful not to wake the child, but Alexander lifted a hand. "It's all right," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to startle you." She hesitated, then lowered herself back down, her knees folded beneath her. "I'll be out of the way in a moment." "You're not in the way," Alexander replied, his voice sharper than intended. It wasn't anger at her, it was at the absurdity of the scene. He glanced toward the closed guest rooms just down the hall. "Why are you here, on the floor? There are beds." I'm fine here," she interrupted softly, without meeting his eyes. Her tone was final, like a door closing. He studied her for another long moment, then forced himself to nod. There was a chill in the air, and the blanket she had barely reached her ankles. The child stirred in his sleep, pressing his small hand against her collarbone. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Maya." "Maya," he repeated, the name settling into his mind like a puzzle piece that didn't yet have its place. He wanted to ask more, about the child, about why she was here, but something in her guarded posture told him he'd get nothing tonight. So he stepped back, offering a nod before turning away. But as he walked down the hall, the image burned into him. Maya on the floor, holding the child as if he were the last thing keeping her alive. It was a picture Alexander Kane knew he would not forget. Alexander didn't sleep much that night. Even in the comfort of the master suite, with its velvet drapes and heated stone floors, the image of Maya on the hardwood lingered. Her protective embrace around the child, the way she'd said, "I'm fine here," without even looking at him, it gnawed at him.
He wasn't a man easily unsettled, but something about that scene had felt wrong. Not scandalous, not even pity-inducing, just wrong, like finding a priceless violin left in the rain. By sunrise, the rain had stopped. A thin layer of mist hugged the gardens outside, and the smell of wet earth drifted in through the cracked window. Alexander got dressed earlier than usual, his tailored charcoal suit paired with a white shirt opened at the collar. No meetings today, no boardroom politics. He wanted answers. He found her in the kitchen. Maya was standing near the industrial-sized stove, her hair pulled back neatly now, a pale blue apron over her plain gray dress. The boy was nowhere in sight. She was stirring a pot of oatmeal, her movements quiet and efficient, as though she were trying not to disturb the air itself. "You're up early," Alexander said, leaning casually against the doorway. "So are you." Her tone was neutral, polite, but not warm. Alexander stepped into the room. "Where's the boy?" "In the laundry room," she replied without hesitation. "Napping. I start work before he wakes." "You work here?" he asked. He already suspected the answer, but he wanted to hear her say it. "Yes, sir." She kept stirring, cleaning, laundry, whatever's needed. "Who hired you?" "Mrs. Thorne." She named the house manager. She let me stay when I had nowhere else." "And yet you sleep on the floor." This time she stopped stirring. Her back straightened, and for a moment he thought he might actually look him in the eye. Instead, she adjusted the apron strings and said, "It's easier that way." "Easier than a bed?" His voice held an edge of disbelief. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Beds come with strings, Mr. Kane. The floor doesn't." The words hung in the air, quiet, but loaded. Alexander's brows drew together. He wasn't sure whether she meant strings in the literal sense, rules, expectations, or something darker. Before he could press further, the sound of small footsteps echoed in the hallway. A moment later, the boy toddled into view, rubbing his eyes with one small fist. His hair was a soft cloud of curls, and he wore an oversized t-shirt that clearly wasn't made for him. Maya's entire demeanor shifted at the sight of him. Her shoulders softened, her eyes warmed. She bent down and scooped him effortlessly, resting him against her hip. "Morning, Isaiah," she murmured, kissing the top of his head. The boy looked at Alexander curiously, but Maya didn't offer an introduction. It was as though she had decided, consciously, that these two worlds shouldn't mix. Alexander stood there a moment longer, his hands in his pockets. He could feel a dozen questions crowding his mind, but he let them go, for now. Still, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to leave this mystery alone.
By mid-afternoon, Alexander was back in his study, staring at a spreadsheet that had long since blurred into meaningless columns. Normally, numbers gave him control, a clean, predictable battlefield. Today, they only reminded him of the unpredictability in his own house. He closed the laptop and leaned back in the leather chair. From the open window, he could hear faint laughter from the garden. Not the high-pitched giggles of spoiled children he'd overheard at corporate retreats. This was gentler, unguarded, like the sound of a bird that didn't know it was being listened to. Curiosity overpowered restraint. He left the study, following the sound across the hall and down the marble steps. Through the glass doors leading to the back patio, he saw them. Maya kneeling in the grass, helping Isaiah build an uneven tower of wooden blocks. Her shoes were off. Her skirt was wrinkled from sitting cross-legged. The boy clapped each time the tower grew taller. She grinned as if his applause was the only currency that mattered. It was the most alive he'd seen her. Alexander stepped outside, and the crunch of gravel under his shoes made her glance up instantly. Her smile vanished, replaced with the guarded expression he'd first seen in the kitchen. "Mr. Kane," she said politely. Her tone made the formality sound like a wall.
"Just Alexander," he replied. "I'm not my father." Her eyes flickered briefly, as if the mention of family struck a chord, but she didn't comment. Instead, she began gathering the blocks into a small canvas bag. Isaiah, sensing the game was over, pouted. Alexander crouched down to the boy's level. "Hey," he said softly, "I was hoping to see how high it could go." The boy studied him cautiously, then glanced at Maya for approval. She hesitated, then nodded once. Isaiah handed Alexander a block. The billionaire smiled and added it to the top of the tower. They played in silence for a few minutes, until Alexander asked, "Isaiah's father around?" The question made Maya's hands still. For a heartbeat, her face betrayed something raw. Grief, maybe, or fear. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "No," she said finally, "he's not." "And his mother?" "She's—" Maya exhaled through her nose, as though the word itself weighed too much. "I'm his mother." That surprised him. Not because he doubted it, but because of the way she'd been living. He had assumed, perhaps unfairly, that Isaiah was a nephew or a neighbor's child she'd taken in, something temporary. Not this. He wanted to ask the obvious follow-up question, where was Isaiah's father, but her expression made him stop. Instead, he shifted the conversation. "How long have you been working here?" 4 months. "And before that?" She placed the last block carefully on the tower, watching it sway. "I worked at a hotel. Before that, I moved around a lot." "Because you wanted to?" "Because I had to." The tower collapsed. Isaiah laughed. Maya smiled at him, but her eyes didn't quite match the curve of her lips. Alexander stood up. Something told him he wouldn't give him more today. Not because she couldn't, but because trust wasn't something she handed out like spare change. Still, he'd gotten one answer he hadn't expected. She wasn't passing through. She was staying. And that made him wonder. If she intended to stay, why still sleep on the floor?
The mansion always seemed quieter after sunset. Not peaceful, more like the quiet of a forest where predators waited in the dark. The staff had their own rhythm after hours, a hum of clinking dishes in the kitchen and murmured voices in the servants' quarters. Alexander rarely paid attention to it, until now. He had gone down to the wine cellar to retrieve a bottle for himself when he heard 2 voices in the service corridor beyond. It wasn't eavesdropping, he told himself. He simply paused to listen because one of them had said Maya's name. "Told her not to bring that boy here," one voice whispered. It was Mary Ann, the head housekeeper. She had worked for the Kane family since before Alexander was born, and she had a tone like a locked door. "You know what people will say if they find out." The second voice belongs to Clara, one of the younger maids. "She didn't have anywhere else, Mary Ann. I've seen them at night. He clings to her like she's all he's got." "That's not the point," Mary Ann said sharply. "There are things she's not telling us about why she left her last job, about that night." Clara's voice dropped so low Alexander could barely catch it. "They said it wasn't her fault. The police even." "They didn't clear her," Mary Ann interrupted. "They just didn't have enough proof, and that's different." A door creaked open, and their voices faded into the clatter of pans. Alexander stood in the shadow of the stairwell, his grip tightening on the wine bottle. Proof of what? What could a woman like Maya, a woman who read to a child on the kitchen floor, possibly be accused of? He took the long way back to his study, bypassing the kitchen entirely. The mansion's chandeliers cast pools of gold light on the hardwood floors, and his reflection followed him in every pane of glass. He couldn't shake the image of Maya's guarded eyes earlier that afternoon. If she had a past dangerous enough for Mary Ann to speak in hushed tones about, why had she been hired at all? And by whom? He poured himself a glass of wine, but didn't drink it. Instead, he stared at the crimson liquid and thought of Isaiah's small hands pressing a block into his palm.
Whatever the rumor was, the boy didn't deserve to be caught in it. In the far-off silence, he thought he heard a faint sound, soft, broken, a child's muffled sob. Then, a woman's voice, low and soothing. Without realizing it, he was moving toward the sound.
The sound led Alexander through a dim hallway seldom used by guests. Here, the walls were lined with old portraits of Cain ancestors, stern faces and colder eyes staring down at him. The air smelled faintly of dust and polish. He moved carefully, each step slow so the floorboards wouldn't creak. The murmured voice grew clearer. "Shh, it's all right, baby. I've got you. I'll always have you." It was Maya. He reached the end of the hallway, where a single service door stood half open. Through the narrow gap he could see her, sitting on the floor, back against the wall, Isaiah in her arms. The boy was half asleep, cheeks streaked with tears. Maya rocked him gently, humming a tune so soft it barely existed. Her uniform was rumpled, hair escaping its neat bun, but her face... God, her face held a tenderness Alexander had never seen in the world he inhabited. It wasn't just care, it was fierce, unyielding love. The room itself was barely a room at all, more like a storage nook with a thin blanket spread on the hardwood. A few folded clothes were stacked in a corner next to a small battered suitcase. That was it. No bed, no comfort, nothing a child deserved. Alexander felt something twist in his chest. This wasn't just a maid resting between shifts. This was her home, the floor of his mansion. Maya leaned down and kissed Isaiah's temple. Her voice broke as she whispered, "One day, I'll get you a real bed, and no one will ever be able to take it away." Alexander's fingers curled around the doorframe. He should have left, should have turned and pretended he hadn't seen. Instead, he stepped inside. Maya's head jerked up. Her eyes, wide and startled, met his. For a split second, he saw panic flash there, as if he'd caught her committing a crime. Isaiah stirred, but she tightened her hold. She began, but her voice faltered. She stood slowly, keeping the boy cradled against her shoulder. "I didn't mean to spy," Alexander said quietly. "I was walking by, and I heard him." Maya's jaw tightened. "Then you've seen enough," she said, moving past him toward the hall. But Alexander stepped aside, blocking her path, not in force, but in quiet insistence. "This is where you sleep," he said. "Yes. In my house," he said, his voice low. "A child is sleeping on the floor." "It's not your problem, Mr. Cain," she replied, her words clipped. Her eyes, dark, steady, dared him to argue. But Alexander didn't. Not yet. Instead, he watched as she disappeared into the shadows of the corridor, carrying the boy like the most fragile thing in the world. He stood there long after they were gone, with the image burned into his mind. He had seen wealth displayed in every form, diamonds, penthouses, yachts. But none of it seemed worth a damn compared to the way Maya held Isaiah. And for the first time, he found himself wanting to know everything she was hiding. The sun spilled across the glass walls of the Cain mansion, turning the marble floors into a sheet of gold. Down in the main dining hall, the long table was already set, crystal glasses, silver cutlery, and an untouched spread of croissants, fruit, and coffee that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Alexander sat at the head of the table, a newspaper folded beside him. He wasn't reading. Instead, he stared at the empty chair halfway down, the one that, according to the seating chart in his mind, Maya would take if she were a guest rather than staff. A minute later, she appeared in the doorway, still in her uniform, hair pinned back neatly this time. Isaiah wasn't with her. She carried a tray with his coffee and a plate of scrambled eggs. "You're up early?" Alexander said, his tone deliberately casual. "It's part of my job, Mr. Cain," she replied, without looking at him. She set the tray down, straightened, and turned to leave. "Wait,"
His voice was sharper than he intended, and it stopped her mid-step. She glanced over her shoulder, eyes wary. "I saw where you sleep last night." The pause in the room was heavy. "You shouldn't have," she murmured. "That's not an answer." He leaned forward, forearms resting on the table. "Maya, there are a dozen guest rooms here, each bigger than that closet. Why?" "Because I'm not a guest," she cut in. Her voice was calm, but there was steel in it. "And because when you've lived my life, you don't expect generosity without a price tag." He studied her. "What price do you think I'd charge for a bed?" She finally met his eyes then, deep, guarded but not afraid. "Everyone charges something, Mr. Kane. Maybe not in money, but something." Something in his chest tightened. Her words weren't cynical. They were experience, carved into her like stone. "Does Isaiah know?" he asked quietly. Her gaze flickered, the first crack in her armor. "He knows enough." They stood there in silence, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound. Finally, Alexander pushed back his chair and gestured to the seat across from him. "Sit. Eat." She hesitated, brows knitting. "Staff aren't allowed at the table." "I own the table," he said simply. "Sit." For a long moment, she looked like she might refuse, but then, maybe out of defiance, maybe out of sheer hunger, she sat. Not in the middle, not at his end, but at the very far corner, like a shadow in a sunlit room. He poured her coffee. She didn't thank him, but she drank. And for the first time since she arrived at his mansion, they shared a meal in uneasy silence.
Alexander Kane was not a man who believed in coincidences. If someone crossed his path twice, it meant they either wanted something from him or had something worth noticing. Maya Brooks was no different. Except, in her case, she had given him no reason to believe she wanted anything at all, which made him even more suspicious. By midday, his private office was lit only by the glow of his computer screen. On it was a file pulled from his discreet network of investigators. The header, Maya Brooks, Background Inquiry. He scrolled. Age, 26. Place of birth, Atlanta, Georgia. Employment history, spotty, mostly service jobs, short-term contracts. Education, 2 years of college, dropped out. Financial record, non-existent. No credit cards, no bank accounts. Everything cash. And then the part that caught his attention, legal guardianship of minor, Isaiah Brooks. Alexander leaned back, tapping his pen against the desk. Isaiah wasn't his son by birth. The file stated nephew. Mother deceased, father unknown. It would have been an unremarkable tragedy, one of millions, except for the note at the bottom. Custody contested. Ongoing legal dispute. He frowned. Contested by who? The door opened without a knock. It was Harrison, his head of security. "You wanted me to check on the Brooks kid?" Alexander swiveled his chair. "Tell me." "Someone's been trying to track their location. Not government, not creditors. Private party, hired through shell companies. Started about 6 months ago." Harrison dropped a thin envelope onto the desk. "We traced the money. Belongs to a man named Victor Gaines." The name meant nothing to Alexander, at first. But then Harrison slid a photo across the table. In it, a man with a slick suit and predatory smile was shaking hands with one of Alexander's rivals in the real estate business. Alexander's mind ticked over. If this Gaines character was looking for Isaiah and Maya was hiding the boy, then she wasn't just a struggling maid. She was running from something, or someone, that had enough resources to hunt her across state lines. "Find out why," Alexander ordered. Harrison nodded. "And the woman? Do you want me to lean on her?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "No, not yet." When Harrison left, Alexander stared at the file again. The thought hit him unexpectedly.
not as a business calculation, but as something heavier. If Maya was sleeping on the floor, not because she couldn't find a bed, but because she was afraid of being found, then this wasn't just his curiosity anymore. It was a problem he couldn't ignore.
Maya's shift was over, but she lingered in the service corridor, adjusting the strap of the worn tote bag slung over her shoulder. Inside, Isaiah's small hand clung to hers. His eyes darted between her and the door to the lobby. He was restless, sensing her unease. "Ready to go home?" she whispered. He nodded, but his voice was quiet. "Are we safe here, Aunt Maya?" She forced a smile. "Of course we are." The lie tasted bitter. Before they could leave, a shadow filled the hallway. Alexander Kane, tailored suit immaculate, stood blocking the only exit. "Maya," he said, not like a greeting, but like a summons. Her spine stiffened. "Mr. Kane, if you're here about the spill in the West Wing, This isn't about the spill," he interrupted. His eyes flicked to Isaiah, softening for just a fraction of a second before they hardened again. "We need to talk. Alone." Her instinct screamed no. "I don't think that's—" "Maya." His tone cut off her protest. "Now." He led her into one of the unused meeting rooms. The door clicked shut, behind them, the air suddenly too still. Alexander didn't sit. Instead, he tossed a manila folder onto the table between them. It slid to a stop in front of her. "Open it," he said. She didn't move. "Go on?" Her fingers trembled as she flipped it open. Inside were pages of her life, birth certificate, employment history, college transcripts she hadn't seen in years, and then Isaiah's custody papers. Her breath caught. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. "I have my ways," he said evenly. "The question is, why is a man named Victor Gaines paying people to find you and the boy?" Her eyes widened, and the mask she'd been wearing cracked. You don't understand." "Then make me," he said, stepping closer, "because right now you look like someone hiding something worth killing for." Her legs felt unsteady. She gripped the edge of the table. "Victor Gaines, he's dangerous. She broke off, glancing toward the door as if the very mention of his name could summon him. "He's not after me. He's after Isaiah." Alexander's gaze sharpened. "Why?" She swallowed hard. "Isaiah isn't just my nephew. He's the heir to something Victor wants. And he'll do anything, to get him." Silence stretched between them, heavy and electric. Then Alexander said, quietly, but with steel in his voice, "You should have told me sooner." Maya's eyes met his, searching for judgment, but found something else, something almost like resolve. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Alexander's answer was simple. "Protect you." The city's evening sky bled into shades of gold and ash as Alexander's limousine pulled away from the hotel. Maya sat stiffly in the back seat. Isaiah pressed against her side, his small fingers clutching her blouse like an anchor. "You didn't have to do this," she murmured, eyes fixed on the blur of streetlights outside. Alexander, seated across from them, was on the phone. His voice clipped, giving rapid orders. "Pull all surveillance footage from the last 72 hours. Yes, send it to my private server. And get me everything on Victor Gaines. I want associates, shell companies, every offshore account." When he hung up, the air between them thickened. "You're staying at my estate tonight," he said simply. Maya's head snapped toward him. "No, I can't. It's not a request." His tone left no room for debate. "The estate has security, gates, and more cameras than the Pentagon. Victor Gaines won't get near you." She opened her mouth to argue but stopped. Deep down she knew this wasn't the time to fight pride, not when Isaiah's safety hung in the balance. They arrived at the Kane estate just after nightfall.
The sprawling property stretched out like a fortress, lit by soft golden floodlights, high walls wrapped around manicured gardens. The gates shut behind them with a mechanical hum that felt both comforting and unnerving. Inside, the marble foyer gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Maya's worn sneakers squeaked on the polished floor. She felt impossibly out of place, like a shadow trespassing in a painting. "This way," Alexander said, leading them up the grand staircase. "The guest wing is private. You'll have your own kitchen, bedrooms, and security code." Isaiah's eyes widened at the sight of the room prepared for him. Soft bed, shelves lined with books and toys. But instead of running to explore, he stayed rooted beside Maya. "Go on," she urged gently. "It's yours for tonight." He hesitated and whispered, "Will you be there if I wake up?" "Always," she promised. Later, as Maya stepped into the guest suite's sitting room, she found Alexander by the window, silhouetted against the night. His jaw was set, his hands clasped behind his back. "There's something else you should know," he said without turning around. "I have reason to believe Victor isn't acting alone. Someone on the inside, someone close to me, may be feeding him information." Her stomach dropped. "Inside the hotel? And possibly inside my own company." He finally turned, his eyes cold with determination. "That's why I need you here, where I can control every variable." Before she could reply, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression hardened. They found Victor's car. It's less than 3 miles from the estate. The words hit her like a blow. "He's here?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he stepped closer, his voice low but unyielding. "No matter what happens tonight, don't open the door for anyone but me."
The Kane estate was quiet, too quiet. Maya sat in the dim glow of the guest suite's table lamp, Isaiah asleep in her lap. Every creak in the old wood, every distant rustle of leaves outside made her nerves snap tighter. She kept replaying Alexander's words in her mind. "Don't open the door for anyone but me." A sudden knock echoed through the room. She froze. It wasn't loud, just 3 soft raps, but in the silence it felt deafening. "Maya?" A voice hissed through the door. It was deep, male, and not Alexander's. Her pulse spiked. "Who is it?" she demanded. "It's security. Mr. Kane sent me to check on you. There's been a breach." Isaiah stirred, mumbling in his sleep. She pulled him closer, forcing her voice to stay firm. "Alexander said he'd come himself." There was a pause. Then the voice dropped into something colder, familiar from her nightmares. "You think you can hide from me forever?" Victor Gaines. Before she could move, the door handle rattled violently. The lock held, but for how long? Her gaze darted around the room. There was no phone in sight, no weapon, just a heavy brass lamp on the table. She eased Isaiah onto the sofa, whispering, "Stay here, no matter what." The pounding on the door grew louder. Wood splintered under the force. Suddenly, a deafening crash erupted from the hallway, followed by shouts. "Get down!" Alexander's voice roared. Gunshots rang out, sharp, terrifying pops that made Isaiah cover his ears and sob. Maya threw herself over him, shielding his small body. Within seconds, the noise stopped. Then footsteps, measured, heavy. The door swung open, revealing Alexander, chest heaving, a black sidearm still in his grip. Behind him, 2 of his security men dragged a bleeding, cursing Victor Gaines down the hall. "You're safe," Alexander said, his voice rough but steady. He holstered the weapon and stepped forward, his eyes scanning her for injuries. Maya could barely speak. "He was right there. He knew your code, didn't he?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "Yes, which means the leak is closer than I thought." He glanced down at Isaiah, who clung to Maya like she was the only solid thing left in the world. For a moment, Alexander's gaze softened, but only for a moment. This isn't over. Until it is, you're not leaving my side.
The Kane estate no longer felt safe. Security men in dark suits moved silently through the corridors, their earpieces crackling. Every door was locked, every camera monitored, yet the air felt heavy with betrayal. Alexander stood in the control room, a wall of screens casting a cold blue light over his face. Maya lingered in the doorway, Isaiah asleep in her arms again, sensing this wasn't a space she belonged. But she also knew, whatever was happening now, it was because of her. "Who knew you were here?" Alexander's voice cut through the low murmur of the head of security, Mason. "Only your inner team. Me, Carla, Davis, and Finn. No one else had clearance." Alexander's eyes narrowed. And yet Victor Gaines was standing outside her door. Maya shifted uncomfortably, feeling the weight of his gaze flicker briefly to her. Maybe someone overheard," she offered, though she didn't believe it herself. Alexander shook his head. "Not possible. The guest wing is soundproof, and my orders were given in private." A tense silence stretched. Then Alexander turned to her fully. "Maya, did you ever work for anyone connected to Victor Gaines? Anywhere he could have gotten close to you before?" The question felt like a hook to her chest. She hesitated, her mind tumbling through memories she'd locked away. "Years ago, I cleaned offices downtown. One of them belonged to—" She stopped. "To a man named Carlton Hayes. Victor was there once. Just once. But—" Her voice trailed. Alexander's face hardened. "Carlton Hayes is on the board of Hale Industries, my competitor." It clicked for both of them at the same time. Before either could speak again, the control room door burst open. Carla, Alexander's sleek, unshakable assistant, stepped in. Only tonight, her expression was pale, her hands trembling. "Sir," she said, eyes darting to Maya, "you need to see this." She handed over a flash drive. Mason plugged it into the main console, and footage lit up the central screen, a grainy camera feed from the back entrance. There, in the shadows, was Carla, handing a key card to Victor Gaines. Maya felt her knees weaken. Alexander didn't move for a long moment. Then he turned his head slowly toward Carla, his voice low and lethal. "Tell me why I shouldn't have you dragged out right now." Carla's eyes glistened. "Because if you do, you'll never find out who she really is." The room went still. Maya's heartbeat thundered in her ears. "What do you mean, who I really am?" Maya whispered. Carla looked directly at her. "Because, Maya, Victor isn't after you for revenge. He's after you for ownership."
Maya's breath caught. Ownership? The word tasted strange, wrong in her mouth. Carla nodded slowly, her voice shaking. "Before you were even born, your mother worked for Victor's father. She signed a contract she didn't understand, papers buried under legal language, giving up rights to her firstborn's guardianship in exchange for wiping out a debt. Victor found that document a year ago." Maya staggered back, Isaiah pressing into her chest, sensing her fear. "That's impossible. My mother—" "She wouldn't." Carla's voice hardened. "She did. She was desperate. Victor thinks you're still bound by it, and worse," Carla's eyes fell to Isaiah, "he believes the contract applies to your child as well." Alexander's jaw tightened like stone. "That contract wouldn't stand in court." Carla shook her head. "Legally? Probably not. But Victor doesn't care about court. He wants leverage. He wants to use Maya and Isaiah to get to you." The words landed like a punch. Alexander moved toward Maya, his presence wrapping around her like a shield. "Then he'll have to go through me."
But Mason cut in, his tone grim. "Sir, it's not that simple. Victor already filed paperwork in a private arbitration court in Nevada. They've scheduled a hearing tomorrow morning. If we don't shut it down before then," he glanced at Isaiah, "he could claim temporary custody until it's sorted." Maya's heart slammed. "No, no, you can't let him—" Her voice broke, panic clawing at her chest. Alexander stepped closer, looking straight in her eyes. "Maya, listen to me. I'll fix this, but you have to trust me completely. No secrets, not about your past, not about anything." Tears blurred her vision. "Do you think I don't want to? My whole life has been running from men like him." Alexander's phone buzzed sharply. He glanced down, and his face went pale. A photo had arrived. Maya and Isaiah, taken through the window of the guest wing. Time-stamped 10 minutes ago. The caption was a single line. "If you want them safe, come alone." Alexander's voice was barely a whisper, but it held the weight of war. "He's already inside the estate."